All right, hey guys, we're in the 80s now. So I got Michael Jackson playing in the background because he's just way too awesome and he epitomizes the 1980s. This is the music I grew up with. Really cool stuff. Okay? So I'm going to show you, I'll let you listen to a couple of my favorites while we do the 80s. So we're going to talk about the end of the Cold War. You need to know what George H.W. Bush's background was and what his popular promise was in the 88 campaign. What historical event occurs in October of 1990? And in August 1990 was the new character on the stage, Saddam Hussein. You need to know who he is and what he does to stir up things in the Middle East. All right, end of the Cold War. So the election of 88 saw the Democrats nominate Michael Dukakis, governor of Massachusetts, who's going to run for president, a fairly young man, against the Republicans nominated Reagan's VP, George H.W. Herbert Walker Bush. He's going to be their candidate for president. Bush has a resume that is miles long. Okay, he has this extensive foreign policy background, is a former ambassador, also former CIA director, and of course has been vice president. Okay, so here's Dukakis. Maybe a picture of him. There he is. All right, the Democrat. And here's George H.W. Okay, there he is. All right, so Bush is going to say Dukakis is soft on crime, and Dukakis is very weak on national security and defense. And he's going to appeal to voters in a typical Republican way by promising there will be no taxes raised. And he has a famous saying, which I'll show you in a minute: read my lips, no new taxes. Bush is going to win by 426 electoral votes to Dukakis' 112. So he pretty much killed him. Okay. Now, let me show you that video. I've got to get Michael to stop for a second. Hold on, Michael. And I want to show you that video of George H.W. Very famous line. Okay. All right, here we go.
Raise taxes and I'll say no, and they'll push and I'll say no, and they'll push again and I'll say to them, read my lips.
Read my lips, no new taxes. Okay, that's what he says. Read my lips, no new taxes. That comes up later. All right, it's going to be something you need to know for later. Okay, so Tiananmen Square, a very sad thing actually. May of 1989, students in China began demonstrating for their freedom. And they did this in Beijing's Tiananmen Square, which is a huge open area in the middle of Beijing, and a lot of government buildings around there. And attracted worldwide attention. Chinese students are going to plead for their democracy and their freedom. It's a lot of students primarily. They're going hunger strikes. It's just, we take for granted our freedom so often. And this showed the world how desperate the Chinese were for their freedom. June 4th of 89, the Chinese leaders sent out tanks and troops to crush the demonstrations. Several hundred protesters were killed, thousands were wounded, and martial law is enacted, and our hopes for democracy there are dashed. Just not a good time in Chinese history, much less the world. It's a great picture of, I can't get it all on there, but there's so many students against the Chinese military there. And this is probably the most famous of them all. If I can move it over. This gentleman here standing in front of the tanks. They do crush him. Okay. All right. So, Chinese students pushing for their rights, they don't get them. Another huge ordeal. Gorbachev declares he's no longer going to support the communist governments in Eastern Europe. The Iron Curtain falls down. So in Poland, 89, they elect their leader, Lech Walesa, as president, and the Communist Party falls from power in Poland. Huge celebrations. And we went through the Iron Curtain going up in our class several weeks ago. You can imagine how elated these people are with that. Oh, I think Michael has stopped. Hold on a second. Let's see. So, you gotta look through it. Okay, so Poland, the communist government is gone in Poland, and they start having free elections. Same thing for Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Romania. All these areas that did not have freedom before now have it. Okay, huge celebrations there. Then in 89, the communist leaders announced the opening of the Berlin Wall. And now 12-foot high sections of the wall come down as this symbol of separation, and communism falls. Then in 90, the two Germanys that have been divided since 45, remember Yalta, are finally reunited. And in 1990, the Soviet Baltic republics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, declared their independence from the old USSR. The old USSR completely falls apart by 1991, and Gorbachev is a leader with no country, really. Boris Yeltsin is elected the president of the Russian Republic. He disbands the Communist Party there, tries to establish democracy. President Bush is thrilled with this, but cautious. He's concerned of violence in the former Soviet Union. But things go pretty smoothly considering. So let me show you just a few pictures of all of that. This is the Berlin Wall coming down. Really cool pictures. I was in the 7th or 8th grade at the time, and my teacher, my history or social studies teacher, cried. We watched on television. She cried like a baby. And of course, we didn't really understand, but she had grown up when the wall was put up. So a huge, momentous occasion, not just for Germans, but people all around the world who love democracy and freedom. All right, and then also, here's another one, which is a really cool picture of the celebrations in Berlin when the wall came down. So really neat. And it is a neat memory for me too, because I can remember seeing all that on the news. All right, so Persian Gulf War. In August of 1990, Iraq's dictator, Saddam Hussein, invades very oil-rich and neighboring country, Kuwait, and basically threatens all Western oil sources in the Persian Gulf. President Bush acts very wisely and gets a coalition of several countries within the UN to put pressure on Hussein to withdraw from from Kuwait, to leave Kuwait, go back to Iraq. This is not effective. In January of 91, Congress gives its approval for a military campaign, and we call that Operation Desert Storm. So wanted to show you that. And the zombies are out. I'm turning these off. Okay. So Operation Desert Storm, 500,000 Americans joined military units from 28 other nations. So it was very much a united front on the part of the world to stop Hussein from just taking over these other countries. Again, the main issue there was that oil was involved. So we had 5 weeks of airstrikes, a ground war that was conducted by General Norman Schwarzkopf, very big man, and he's going to lead our troops only after 100 hours of fighting on the ground, Iraq concedes defeat. And Bush's approval rating goes up to 90%. Here is Saddam Hussein. Now, this is how I remember him during that time period. And great picture of Desert Storm, a new kind of type of warfare. They came up with new military garb that is light and dark brown. And of course, they're in the middle of the desert. So there's that to contend with, just a different kind of climate than we'd ever fought in before, really. Okay. The other thing I remember is President Bush trying to get his Supreme Court justice approved. Ironically, Thurgood Marshall, as you know, who argued the Brown case, will be the first African American on the court, is retiring, and President George H.W. Bush appoints another African American to take his place. And the difference is this one is extremely conservative. His name is Clarence Thomas. He opposes affirmative action, and during the process of his confirmation, you know, part of checks and balances is the Senate. There has to be Senate hearings to approve him. And an University of Oklahoma law professor, Anita Hill, comes out and accuses Thomas of sexual harassment. And that becomes the key words in the 90s, sexual harassment. And a lot of light is shed on women who are, mistreated in the workplace, comments and things like that are made to them sexually. These incidents happened 10 years before, but of course it all comes out when he's being confirmed for the Supreme Court of the United States. He denies the charges, defends himself. He is narrowly confirmed with a vote of 52 to 48, which is the closest vote ever. So that's kind of interesting. And then it wraps up by saying, during Bush's administration, the deficit was over $250 billion a year, adding over $1 trillion to the national debt. Certainly a recession was looming, and war was part of that, the Operation Desert Storm. So I want to show you a picture of Clarence Thomas also. This is also what I remember of him. He's older today, but this was at his Senate confirmation hearing, and it went on and on and on, and it was all over the news because of Anita Hill claiming sexual harassment. This is going to preclude President Bill Clinton and all of that goes on with him. This is the first sort of sexual scandal in the news during the early 90s. Okay? All right, so let's go back to our essential questions. Okay, so they are, what was George H.W. Bush's background? His background was extensively in foreign policy. Remember, he was an ambassador. He also had served as CIA director, Central Intelligence Agency. So he also was in World War II. So he's a military background, but primarily foreign policy. His popular promise, read my lips, no new taxes. Now, at the end of these notes, I discussed that there's going to be a huge budget deficit. All right? You need to think about, consider, is he going to keep the promise of no new taxes? Yes or no? All right, considering the huge budget deficit that looms over him. What historical event occurs in October of 1990? Well, this is the reunification of Berlin and the fall of the Berlin Wall. And in August of 1990, we see the introduction of Saddam Hussein. Who is he? He is the dictator of Iraq during this time. And what's he doing? He goes into a sovereign nation, Kuwait, invades it with the idea that he was going to take over all the oil reserves there. And, of course, shut us out. And this involves us because we need that oil source. And many other nations, so us, along with our coalition, go in to remove Saddam Hussein in Operation Desert Storm. Okay? All right, so that's the end of our notes for today in our video. And you may want to review this again. It would not be